Thanks, Ryan. I remember when I was you. Hey, Netting, we need you to read this passage of Scripture. Okay. And so I got up there, and I was just focused, and I read it. And I remember reading it and going, I don't really know what I just read, but I hope I did a good job. And maybe that's the way you felt. And maybe that's the way we all feel about this famous passage of Scripture. What the heck is being said in this passage? And so, to help us kind of think about it, we call this by a special name. We call it the Beatitudes, the Beatitudes. That's what this paragraph is called in Scripture. Beatitudes. And when you hear that word, do you hear the word that's inside that word? You hear the B part? What's the second part? Attitude. Okay? So I'm going to be preaching today a little bit about how this passage from Jesus is going to shape the way we have to approach some things with our attitude. And you know, this is a difficult passage. We've heard it several times, and we've kind of gotten used to it, but it's a troubling passage because Jesus seems to infer that if you don't have enough money to get the ice cream, it's okay because you're blessed. But when you don't have enough money to get the ice cream, you don't feel so blessed. When I grew up, ice cream truck come to the neighborhood, and we'd hear the bells, and we'd run to my mother, and we'd say, Mom, can we have money for ice cream? And she'd say, no. And then we would run out after the ice cream truck with all the other kids, and we'd pretend that we were going to get ice cream. And then we would go up to the truck, and all the other kids would get ice cream, and then my brother and I would be like, we don't really want ice cream. You know, it's 95 degrees, we're sweaty, but we don't really want it. Because we were trying to have a B attitude. Didn't always work. Sometimes in Scripture, when things are difficult to understand, what they'll do is they'll take the original Greek passage and they'll do something called transliteration. I'm using a lot of big words today, but it makes me feel important. So transliteration is when you take a passage of Scripture and you translate it, but you try to translate it into a modern nomenclature so that people might better understand it. But the problem is, sometimes when we simplify Scripture, we can also lose the message of Jesus. And this is a classic passage where that happens. Sometimes what we do is we say, this is kind of confusing, this blessed be the this and that. And so where Jesus says, blessed are the poor, for you shall be made whole, instead of blessed, we use the word happy. And this is kind of, we're like, well, we'll just substitute that word blessed for the word happy. But the problem with that word happy is that's a loaded word. And by the way, bad news for everyone on this beautiful Sunday morning, Jesus never promises that we will be happy. And I know that's kind of a strange news, because a lot of us sort of see happiness and the pursuit of happiness as a core American value. That really, if you ask a lot of people on the street, what do you want to do? What would be your goal? They say, well, I'd like to be happy. And then we'd like to respond to them, don't worry, be happy. Yes, that's right. Thank you very much. So this idea of blessedness is not to be synonymous with happiness, but it's easy to do that. It's easy to kind of summarize that. And unfortunately, Jesus isn't going to let us do it that easily. Blessedness is not synonymous with maybe having the food that you want to eat, or with living the way you want to live, or having a good job. Because a lot of times some of those values become kind of these core values that Elizabeth touched on, that I'll be happy if I have this, and I'll be happy if I have that. And so my life is this pursuit of things that can make me happy. But as Elizabeth so correctly mentioned to the children, we can find that sometimes when we reach those values that we've been told by society will make us happy, we don't feel so very happy. But then if we take Jesus for what he's saying, we also have a problem that's difficult to solve. And the problem is that poor and hungry people, if you interview them, they do not tell us that they're feeling blessed. And if we talk to sick and disabled people and we ask them how they're doing, they do not say that they're feeling blessed. And if we talk to abused people or people who are in prison and we ask them how they're doing, they say, I'm not feeling blessed. So we have this conflicting message from Jesus that it seems difficult to figure out what he's getting at. And I'm not going to necessarily going to solve that problem today because it's a complex issue, and I'm not so sure I'm Jesus. Matter of fact, I'm positive I'm not. But I am positive that there's some things that I can touch on, we can wonder about together, and maybe it might help us to begin to approach what Jesus is thinking about. One of the things Jesus does pretty well in this passage is he doesn't really want to bless you for being hungry. But what he wants to do is help you to recognize that it might be an interesting observation in your life that when you're hungry, somehow, through some means, you often find out that you're comforted by food that's provided. Jesus is really preaching today about this interesting critical dilemma that when you are in need, somehow, a lot of times those needs are met. When you're downcast, when you're outcast, when you feel like an outsider, sometimes there are things that happen that bring you back into the fold. Jesus is, in this story, trying to remind us that in God's kingdom, and we don't always use that kind of language, but in God's realm, in the nation that God's trying to build on this earth, God has a vision for including all people. Everyone will be included. Everyone will be welcome. People won't be left out. But in our world where we live, we see winners and we see losers. So today, Super Bowl Sunday is a perfect example of what we like to do. Watch the game and find out who's going to win, and then find out who's going to lose. And that's the way we like it in our nation. But Jesus turns around and says, what happens if everyone wins? And then we say, that's no kind of football game. I'm not going to watch that one. I want to see someone lose. And Jesus says, well, what would it look like if everyone was included? So Jesus is beginning to ask us questions that we don't usually ask. So I was mulling over this message this morning a bit, and I also was stumbling through a copy of Reader's Digest where I heard about Nicole Cliff. Nicole Cliff was walking onto a completely packed airplane with her 1-year-old infant. And her daughter did what kids can do when they get onto airplanes. They can cry. And everyone in the airplane can look at you with scorn and anger. And your small daughter is crying. You know why she's crying? Because she's sick. And you know what little children do when they're sick? They throw up. You know they threw up on? Nicole, all over her seat and her seatbelt as the plane was taxiing. The plane had to turn around. The seat had to be removed because it smelled. Nicole had the entire plane looking at her. But lo and behold, one of the stewardess on the plane takes the child, hands her a pair of workout pants and says, put on some pants. I'll hold the baby. And Nicole said, I don't think I'll ever forget that momentary act of kindness. Nicole Cliff. Tina Smith wrote that she was shopping with her 3-year-old son who was begging for some gummy treats. Now, why would a 3-year-old beg for gummy treats? I don't know. So she carefully explained to her 3-year-old son that they could not afford gummy treats because Daddy had lost his job. And just at that moment, a man came up from behind her and said, I think you may have dropped this. And he handed Smith a $50 bill. Jess writes that when he was 8 years old, he was at the public swimming pool. And he was being made fun of by some of the boys there for being fat. And so he writes that he walked away crying, but just at that moment, a gorgeous college-age woman sprang to his defense, and she got the 3 boys kicked out of the pool. And then she asked this young man if he'd like to hang out with her and her friends for the rest of the day. He said, I remember drinking Tab soda and even having the girls paint my nails blue. A worker at Best Buy was talking with a repeat customer about her ongoing issues with Crohn's disease. She writes that he knew that I'd been very sick and that my health care hadn't kicked in yet and I didn't have a regular doctor. So he sent me to his doctor. He gave me $300 to pay for both the visit and the medicine that I needed. Danielle Liate writes that she's always remembers a woman who gave her a box of tissues when she was crying on the train. She writes, I was trying so hard to keep it together. Everyone looked away from me, but this one woman handed me these tissues and said, we've all been there, crying on the train. It's hard. But whatever is wrong, it'll get better. And Danielle writes that she was a regular-looking business casual lady, but she, in that moment, was a hero to me. And she says, I always carry a pack of tissues now, just in case. I've been told that I should be careful of my preaching in church because occasionally people have been known to cry in this space, myself included. After one Sunday, one of our older members who had been crying in church said, that's it, Dan, that's it. And I thought, that's it, man, I'm never coming back. But fortunately, the that's it meant that she was going to the dollar store and she was picking up small packs of tissues. And she was going to make sure that there was plenty of tissues in all the pews in the sanctuary. Becca Beto writes that she was in her first semester of journalism school and she was second-guessing her decision to pursue a writing career. One day, she handed her debit card to the worker at the coffee shop. He looked at her debit card and said, that sounds like a name of an author. She says, I almost cried on the spot. I never forgot that moment. Jesus is reminding us that sometimes when you are the least in the room, you are the opportunity for great things to happen. Finally, our dear and beloved Judy Fisher. I was sending Judy a text this week with my condolences and also sending my words of sympathy to her for the situation. A woman brought low by the smashing waves of this world, and as I texted and prayed, I found myself crying. Jesus, what are we to do? A woman in our congregation so beautiful, so loved, so kind and generous. A person who's given so much to so many people. Lord, please bless her. Lord, please, Lord, lift her up into your arms. In God's kingdom, everyone has a place. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is included. And that just means that everyone is somehow blessed. Not just the rock stars, not just the overachievers, not just the young men that come out of our congregation to become heroes. Everyone, Chris included. So I sat in the car with tears, and I felt so gosh darn low. And the communication had ended with Judy, but she sent one last text to me. And it was nothing but an emoji. Too much for words to say. That little image, maybe it said what words can't say. Maybe it said that Jesus is still there for everyone. Those that are brokenhearted, those that are hungry, those that feel like the world has stepped on them. And I looked at the emoji and I continued to cry, and I realized that this sermon was a sentence sermon. That we're all blessed. We're all blessed if we choose to be. And that Jesus is always with us.